Welcome to Banking on Community, a podcast that explores how community banks thrive with the leaders who run them. I'm your host, Deb Barnes, a banking strategist and AI advisor with 18 years in banking and financial services. I help banks transform through data, analytics, and automation. In today's episode, we'll meet Erika Martens, the CFO of First Trust Home Loans. We'll learn about her expertise as a mortgage banking veteran, her leadership in the industry, the community impact, and some major achievements at First Trust Home Loans. The episode will focus on bringing members home. We'll learn about the community-centered approach, tech with the purpose, balancing profit and mission, partnership innovation, and data-driven challenges. Hi, Erika. Thanks for joining me today. Glad you're here. I'd love to get started by asking you to tell us a little bit about your role and your company and how those fit together.
Sure, perfect. So thank you for asking me to be on. I love the title of this podcast, right? Banking on Community. Like I'm super pumped. When you sent me that, I'm like, yes, this is one that I want to do. So just a little bit about me. Of course, as you said, my name is Erika Martens. Currently, I serve as the Chief Financial Officer for First Trust Home Loans. And I've really spent my entire adult career in banking, but mortgage banking specifically. I had the great opportunity to like wear all of the hats on the operational side of the mortgage house. Never did any sales, which is probably, especially people who know her, like, yeah, she's not for sales. It was really not my thing, but I do love supporting the sales teams and of course in operations. There's plenty of opportunity. So like underwriting, compliance, closing, processing, technology, investor relations, capital markets, all kinds of stuff on the operations side of the house. I've had my hands in over the years. In the last 6 years, really focused more in on the finance and accounting and that side. I'm here at First Trust, and that's also been really exciting. Separate from that, I'm pretty passionate about advocacy, advocating for the mortgage industry specifically. So I serve currently as the advocacy chair for the Oklahoma Mortgage Bankers Association and have been a past president for that group, but then also the National MBA. I'm the state captain for Oklahoma on their Mortgage Action Alliance, which is just an advocacy arm, building awareness and things like that. Other volunteer stuff, I serve as a board chair for the Health and Wellness Center, which is Oklahoma's largest, this is a mouthful, but Oklahoma's largest rural federally qualified health center. And so a lot of people kind of like, they're like, healthcare, mortgage, like how is that like tied up when we could probably do a whole nother podcast with me talking about that. But to make it super short here, having a safe, stable, secure place to call home is actually just as much an indicator in good health outcomes as, the quality of care and the access to care. And so I do love how those two things, especially in my local community, kind of come together and work with one another. And then, of course, I'm a mom. I have one son. I'm married, got a wonderful husband. I love them both. We have some dogs. I love to read and just spend time with them. So it's just a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I love the connection with the rural health center that you mentioned. I would not have easily made that connection, but now it's like, how could I have not made that connection? So thank you for that. That's a great lesson learned. So tell me a little bit about your current role and your company that you work for.
For sure. So First Trust Home Loans, we're an independent mortgage bank. So I will dive into kind of the differences there, right? Because when I say bank, a lot of times people are like, oh, and they think of their bank on the corner of Main Street, right? But an independent mortgage bank is different from a traditional retail bank. So we don't take deposits. We don't make car loans or have investments. We strictly specialize in mortgage. So we do all of our underwriting and closing and funding in-house. And we have great staff for that. So our company is privately owned and headquartered out of Arkansas. I'm an Okie, so I'm in Oklahoma, and then we have branches all across the South and the Midwest. And we, have a lot of great teams, but again, headquartered and founded actually 22 years ago now in Arkansas. We have a little over 100 employees now, again, kind of spread out across that geographical footprint. So all we do is mortgage. So we love mortgage, and we feel like that gives us a leg up, right? That makes us special because we can focus on that. But kind of like just for a size perspective, so in 2024, we were able to help over 2,700 families with their home purchase or refinance, transactions, and that's like funded loans. But I would tell you that the number of families that we're helping, it's always greater than that, because often people come to us early on in their stage and they're not ready, but our teams are so good about, they're helping people all along the way, right? It's not about a funded loan transaction. It's about getting them home. And sometimes that's not just, an instant 30-day process. So that number, I wish I could quantify a little better. Every phone call that our originators are taking and every person they're helping, encourage to save a little here and there, restructure debt to get in a qualifying zone. But that's a little bit about First Trust.
Yeah, that's great. I love the, helping them get home concept. And that's actually a lot of what has caused my interest in this space more. I've been at USAA for almost 18
Okay.
years. I'm sure you might be familiar with
Oh,
us,
sure.
but our mission is definitely very much focused on our members. And I think the other places that do that best are community banks, credit unions, and the local mortgage lenders, or those that are really there in the communities. Because what I've been seeing is just that balance between, um, the business has to run and be successful, but also that extra help and support that's provided. So I love the story you just told about how people in your team are helping those potential homeowners, get ready in a variety of ways. That's fantastic. Okay, so what does a typical day look like for you?
So I would tell you that probably there's no typical day. Probably not in anybody's job, especially in banking, but in mortgage, there's no typical day. And it's gonna feel like it's a little bit, I feel like it's boring. So I'm thinking through, like, what do I do every day? So in my role, I'm, responsible for oversight on accounting, finance, HR, capital markets. These are kind of the parts of the business. They're not real exciting and nobody really thinks about it at it in a way. They can seem boring. I don't think it's boring, right? I think it's very exciting, but it's the sort of work that has to get done regardless of really what kind of business you're in, right? You have to have good records, pay your bills, pay your employees, keep the benefits going. And so they've definitely noticed if we weren't doing those things, right? But as we do them, it's kind of like unseen, and I don't mind that. But I do work remote most of the time, but most of my team is on site at our corporate office, and then or they're also remote, but they're remote somewhere else. And so one of the things that takes up a lot of time in my day, and this is probably pretty customary now because a lot of people work remote, but it wasn't always like that for me. But I have made very conscious effort to be very intentional about having FaceTime with my teammates. So I have several meetings every day, and there's Zooms, like cameras on, and we may be talking through a project we're on, or they may have had a question that, they save up their questions, and we kind of go through like a hot list, if you will, of things that are happening. But having the video on and talking, like, we make some time for connections. So I do a bunch of additional stuff there. And that takes up some time, but it's good time. It's time well spent. I have noticed, like, in doing that, it makes me a better leader. I mean, let's just be honest. But I think it's made my teams very, like, functioning, much, much better. Made them, I think, appreciate, the company and feel more valued because I'm not just way off here somewhere else, not paying attention to them. Other things I'm doing, right? Reporting, analytics. I'm looking ahead. I'm often looking behind too, right? Accounting is a look back, finance and, analysis is a look ahead. And I work closely with our executive team. So we have a 4-person executive team, CEO, who's also our founder and owner. I'm very involved. Like, the reason this place feels so magical to me, definitely, I'm giving him all the credit because he's just very into the business. He understands mortgage and people. But our president and COO, like, we have a great relationship, and so there's plenty of time. Like, we're doing a lot of talking. So my days are less structured than they used to be when I was maybe pushing files through or handling the bill pay directly.
No, I mean, it's always that balance. I think you highlighted well, what leaders face today. It's a balance between creating that trust and connection with your team, fulfilling those the required components of your role and looking forward. Right, looking forward is actually the hardest thing to make time for usually.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
it
It
sounds
is.
like you have some exciting peers though that you work with and the owner to keep that focus, the future focus as well. Thank you for sharing that. The remote component really resonates with me as well, and creating that safe space for team members is so important. in whatever business that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
and
right,
I
so let's,
say to them, like, turn your cameras on, show up. Like, I don't care if you washed your hair today, if you have a ball cap on, if you're wearing your sweatshirt, if your dogs are barking, if you're trying to eat your breakfast burrito. Like, I don't mind. Like, if we were interacting in an office setting together, I guess there might be a dress code in a super, but whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, those things would be happening, and so it's not a big deal. It's just us, and we're human beings. So.
yeah, I totally agree. All right, let's talk about these industry trends a little bit. So, what
All
major
right.
shifts are you seeing in the industry right now?
So I'm seeing a lot globally, economically, and mortgage is a function of economics for sure. And we're impacted by a lot of things we can't control, just as a lot of industries are. But I will say, so the continued impact of the market fluctuations, the uncertainty in the market, those things have definitely, I mean, it's cooled refinance activity, obviously, because all these people refinance when rates were, you know, artificially low. I always like to say they were lower than they should have been, too low, not unrealistic, but they're out of the money in terms of that being activity at the moment. People who want to buy a home, they're sitting on the sidelines because they're not sure what to do. And so that's, been a real shift. Affordability just in general, minus the whole market fluctuations. I mean, it's creating a real barrier for all people in terms of whether they can purchase, because it's not just about the rate, but you have the supply problem, the inventory problem, taxes and insurance, right? Like the rising cost of those. That's a component of what you're taking on monthly when you jump into home ownership. And so I definitely see that those market changes are causing people to have to shift both the consumer mindset and the lender's mindset, right? Like what our expectations are and results internally and the ways we can serve our customers. Obviously, the acceleration of technology. I mean, you can't turn around and there's not another cool thing that AI or Chat GPT or whatever those engines can do for you, right? I think right now the action figures are all the rage. People are making those and posting them, but in terms of mortgage, customers have a higher expectation than they have in the past of, well, borrowers have a much higher expectation of what they can be able to do digitally, the access they have to information now, and that's definitely a shift. And we have embraced early on. So, I mean, we had a lot of mobile tools and things, like we've had them for many, many years, but those things advance very quickly, right? And so, even though you have a tool, you have to make sure you're up to date on the features of the tool and, new features feed into your system. So, definitely the acceleration of the digital transformation, both in terms of a consumer's expectation, but also in terms of what we can do from an automation perspective to innovate operationally, to do things a little bit faster, to do things a little more streamlined. And then finally, and this is one that I love, a shift that has been positive, if you will, is the shift in the consumer's opinion of their mortgage lender in general. Right. So we've had a lot of years where people thought we were the big bad wolf. I mean, and maybe rightfully so. And as I say, I mean, the mortgage industry as a whole, we did probably deserve some of the heat that we got, 2008 and behind it when there was a lot going on. Those of us who've always done things right, that we're super sore about that, but we can understand where people are coming from. And I really feel like now, just even in my interactions with people who they know I'm a CFO, but they've like lost the connection that it's like a mortgage company, right? And the things that I hear from folks and that you see in media, I think people really are coming back to the fact that their mortgage lenders, especially their community local mortgage lenders, we're their people, right? Like we're their partner. We have homes too. We have to pay interest rates and we have to pay bills and live in our communities. And we're on their side, whether that's getting them ready to go, like I talked about earlier, to get in the home today, or whether it's helping them along. So, it's going to be 6 months from now and you need this extra resource, or maybe even mortgage lenders, I think as a whole, as an industry, we're working together a lot better, which I also think amps up that image, and rightfully so, to consumers. Like we're all in this together. Like we understand how important this is for everybody. So those are kind of the shifts, I say: digital transformations, market uncertainties, and consumer sentiment, I guess, if we had to like give it a name.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, as you think about those things together, about just how much larger portion a home is of people's expenses as are today, the cost component that you talked about versus, 20 or 30 years ago, that it was a smaller component of your ongoing expenses and how the industry is handling that. So I'm hearing some things like, hey, we're trying to make things less expensive by making ourselves more efficient, like automation as an example. Can you connect some of those other dots for me, or even give some examples on like the automation front? What are some great things you've done recently on the automation front?
Sure. You know, we're constantly, especially the whole digital transformation piece and competition. Competition's good and healthy, right? We think we're the very best, but we love to be challenged on that and rise to the occasion, of course. But that's really caused us to constantly evaluate and reevaluate, our technical infrastructure, right? So number one, in terms of cost, generally the biggest checks I'm writing are for some kind of support or tech or software or something. And so, we have to be good stewards of, if I don't mind to write the check if we're getting what we're supposed to be getting and if it's making a difference. And so we're constantly looking, we have this technology thing, whether we built it ourselves or we bought it, that's kind of a moot point. Are we using it to the best of its ability? Are we using it like it's plugged into the system and it works, but are the people using it the way that we need it to be used? Because, like I don't know if there were some studies, right? They build these beautiful sidewalks in parks and people still walk through the grass, right? Because they want to get to where they're going. They just have this natural flow. And I've seen some cool things about how people, park. This is total rabbit trail, but I'm getting somewhere with the data, right? People are the same way when they're using a system, especially when they've used it a certain way for such a very long time. You have to work really hard on that. But some of the automation, so it's really cool and sounds going to sound very simple and basic, but listen, I get excited about stuff easily that we've done recently. So we have a lot of, documents still come in, as much as we'd love to be where we're not having to we don't touch paper really anymore. It's a whole bunch of PDFs, but where we could just have data dumps, we still have paperwork that comes in. We have a great mobile app, so borrowers may have their bank statement and they can save it from their online banking onto their phone and just it shoots it right in the app, and then the app grabs it, uses an integration to pull it into our loan system, and it's there. But the pulling of the stuff in, right, has to be done. And so in the past, we would have a person would open a file and say, oh, you have documents and they'd upload. And, depending on the stability of your internet connection and, how many people were on, and the size of the documents, there was time there that a person was really just, sitting, waiting for the stuff to upload. So we introduced some automation that allowed that process to happen without a person having to physically open a file, press a button. It sounds really simple, right? Oh, I saved that closer 2 minutes a day a file. Well, in the aggregate, across 20, let's say used last year 2,700 files, that's a lot of time that she gets back to do more value added things, the things that move the needle. I mean, the customer service, items and, the balancing or, closing is just an example. But that's been one of the really cool things that I think we've done. Mortgages actually, um, we are kind of the dinosaur in the room a lot of times, right? You can get a car loan in about 5 minutes, it seems like, but it still takes 30 days to get a mortgage. But one of the things that I think people don't realize, and this is a kind of hot button too legislatively, artificial intelligence in all of the many ways it's defined. Mortgage has been using those kind of decision models and frameworks for many, many years, into the 1990s. We've had automated underwriting systems that read the data and, apply, the rules and the logic and give you back recommendations. Credit scoring models, right? I mean, they also use some form of artificial intelligence. And so I think that's maybe also a trend and a thing in data and the digital world that is often overlooked. I mean, we've had to make sure that we say in other states and even at the federal level, hey, we do think people should have to be responsible with AI. There are issues here. However, you can't throw a blanket over all of it, right?
And now you're taking one more thing off of that person's plate. You've made them a little bit happier. That's going to translate into productivity for your company and happiness for that person.
For sure.
And then you talked about customer sentiment, you talked about digital transformation and AI, and you talked about the market fluctuation. So of those, or maybe give a perspective on what's impacting your business or your growth strategy the most, right now.
So I think, the affordability issue, which again I said earlier, it's very complex and it contains a lot of uncontrollables. And one thing too that we've been working on, just mindset, right? Like focus on what you can't control, right? You can give good service, you can do the right thing, things like that. But I think the affordability issue is something that's definitely made us have to step up to find better, responsible ways to help our customers. And so some of those have been, in the last few years, we've really embraced a lot of what I'm going to call, I'm trying not to use super heavy lingo here, but non traditional lending products, right? So people can qualify if they have a different kind of asset that's not what you might consider traditional, or they have different kinds of income. And those programs have been very successful. And number one, they're done really, really well. So they're still responsible lending, right? We're not talking about tell me how much money you make and I'll just take your word for it and
Yeah.
give you a $500,000 loan. Nobody's doing that anymore. That's
No
not a
crossing
thing.
your fingers, huh?
Right. But there are people who make money in different ways, and it's documented in different ways outside of just the standard W 2 or even, a Schedule C. And so we've really opened the door to try to help those borrowers as well. The other thing, too, with us, so we're in a lot of rural communities. A lot of, I call them hometowns. Every town's a hometown to somebody, but and we do a lot of rural housing loans. But on top of that, we do a lot of DPA loans. We've really embraced the down payment assistance model, whether that's private DPA because sometimes that's what's needed, or the state housing finance agencies. Gosh, every state we're in, we do the state housing finance agency work, and they're great partners too. And so that's one way that we've tried to address the affordability. I think with the consumer sentiment, and we talked a lot about the digital earlier, but I feel like that's just a constant evaluating, reevaluating cycle. That's how we're addressing that. We're always looking, we're reading, we're hearing things inside of our executive team. We may be like, hey, did you see this article? Like, is this like a thing that's coming? Do we need to pay attention to this? So it's a lot of communication and research. But with consumers, I really think, we've been really working hard to keep our teams prepared to help people. So when they call, we have great people, but we're giving them added resources, right? Access to experts in our field, resources, tools, trainings, so they can have better, more fluid conversations that help the consumer make a decision, help the consumer feel confident. Whether that's, yeah, I'm not ready today, or yes, let's do it. So to address kind of that shift, and that's the positive shift, right? So to reinforce it and to keep making it better, we're continuing to make sure we have good, competent experts out there talking to our customers and our communities.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And it's gonna keep changing. Those challenges are gonna keep changing and
Yeah,
evolving, right? So it's just
they are.
having to stay so fresh, all of the time. So I'm gonna kind of shift into your current state, although we've been kind of talking about that as well. What's working really well for you right now?
So this is probably everyone expects the CFO to say that what's working really well for me is something like highly technical or mathematical, but actually what's working really well for me, going back to my connection with my team, like having built that intentionality in and seeing some results from that. I mean, it has definitely created wins for me in the technical space and the tasks and the things that I can do, but it's created better relationships. So I feel like my workforce, they're plugged in a little better, they're connected too. Because I listen, I can do really good at like getting like laser focused, I'm in the zone. And before I was intentional about reaching out and having time with my team, I could get into a project and I might like literally not talk to another human being for 2 or 3 days. Well, I guess I have to talk to my husband and my kid. They need me a little bit, but like I would be like laser focused. And from the perspective of me, I'm like, I just got to get this done. But from the perspective of my employee, who's 150 miles away, he hasn't heard from me in 2 days. But what fills the void, right? Negativity. And so, he maybe didn't feel like, well, what am I supposed to be doing, or am I doing it right, or And so having made that step, that discipline in myself to be intentional with that has paid greater dividends than just the relationship. So I know it's kind of a weird way to answer the question on what's been working well, but that personally,
businesses thrive and people thrives on many factors, you know, and
For
I
sure.
think that's what you're pointing out.
Yeah.
There are the, technical components of our work, and then there are the, I'll say, like, leadership or character components of our work. And as I've talked to more and more folks in this community lending banking space, that character part is such a big part of the
Yeah.
equation.
Yeah.
Such a big part of the equation. And it's
And
something
you're
that
never
I'm
there,
learning and
right?
loving, you know?
Yeah. You constantly have to improve that, right? Like there's no end game on that, you know.
Absolutely. Okay, so how about metrics? So as the CFO, what metrics are you focused on for your company right now?
So this is going to sound very vague, and part of it's by design, right? We don't Let's not give away all the secret sauce. But so one of the things we've been highly focused on is the efficient deployment of our resources. And kind of what I mean, I feel like it's great we have these common themes in the whole meeting, but circling back to data and to technology. So we have a lot of great people. We have a lot of great technology, but every day we still can find that there are friction points, right? Where those things aren't working together the way that they should, or where, oh, we could fully utilize this in a different way, or we're not utilizing that at all and nobody's even noticed, and it's not, had a negative impact. Maybe that is just a shiny thing that we thought we needed to have, and we didn't need to have it. So we're constantly evaluating those tools, tech tools and resources. And people, I mean, people are people and I love them. They're not a thing, but they are a resource too, right? Their time matters. Their satisfaction in their job matters. And so we have to make sure the deployment of that resource is also efficient. It's super hard though, because some of the data on whether the tech's working is qualitative data, right? Like I can read a report and I know what is a good turn time and what is a bad turn time, and I can instantly draw a conclusion. But a lot of the data is qualitative, right? So it's not just spit it to me in a report and I can easily say, "Oh, that's the bottleneck or that's the problem." Instead, you have to dig a little deeper. You have to ask more questions. You have to make sure you're not, loading a bunch of bias or your own perspective into your analyzing of the data, and then turning around and making shifts in your business and your workflow and your, where people are positioned to do their jobs, what tech you're keeping or losing, because, your data was biased, I guess. So, I mean, I know it feels really, really vague. It's not like a strict KPI. Obviously, we look at all of the stuff everybody else does, but all of that really comes down to, are we doing things efficiently, correctly, right? That's another component. You can be fast and you can be accurate, but there's a balance there, right? And you have to constantly walk the tightrope on it. So that's really one of the main things we're focusing on. And then in the data side, it's also about getting the data to be as clean as possible. Everybody here rolls their eyes when I start to talk about dirty data, but that's what I call it. I mean, like, it comes into the system and it's in the wrong place, it's not updated. And with all the technology and the automation that makes our life super easy. Well, that's maybe an overstatement, but easier.
Easier,
There's
yeah,
also
let's
the
say that.
component that the system itself is super smart, but it only knows what you tell it. And so if you're getting a result, like, for us, we have a system that manages our commissions. But when someone says, hey, this loan's not calculating right, I generally, without question, can be like, well, it's not calculating right because field 123 doesn't have what it needs, and the system knows to read this. And for whatever reason, it wasn't put in, it was put in wrong, whatever.
Yeah. Somebody
And
fat fingered something along
for
the
sure,
way, or
for sure.
the transmission got
Yeah.
dropped or whatever. Yeah.
So working on data integrity in that respect, it's been something that, again, it's a sort of like the whole character improvement. It's constantly happening. You constantly have to watch it. As I said, technology is great, but it can break. Like, has its limitations too. And so some of the ways I've been kind of trying to combat that, we have a great team in our IT and like our loan system side. They've done a lot of programming work to create like fail safes around common types of things. Like on every loan, this particular box needs to be check marked. Well, by all means, let's just default it to be checked and not expect someone to have to add that to their list of stuff to do, right? Or if these three things are marked, this triggers this alert that we need to be digging in a little deeper into this particular thing. They've done a lot of great work with that, and that I think has helped. And we've also just focused on training. Like, probably people get tired of hearing the same, like, make sure you're doing this, or, let's remember, we'll do like fun contests kind of around training. But the thing is, the repetition, I think, is what gets it. And you're never ever there, so you're constantly having to do it. So that's kind of how we've been addressing. And then, of course, on the accounting side, we have a whole month-end close process, but I've added some reporting that's not really actually at a financial level, but at a loan level for us, so that we can kind of validate what we're seeing. Because I do, even though I love technology and automation, still have this like old school, I don't trust any of you, any of you computers and integrations, and I'm going to double check all of it. So.
Well, the point you made just a moment ago about the system's going to do exactly what you tell it. And sometimes you might have made an update and you told it something that didn't go as you thought it was, right? What you thought versus what got written was just a little bit different. And that can make a huge difference in your outcomes, right? And so I think that's the trust but verify kind of mindset.
Yes, for sure.
When you were talking about data integrity, the last couple of years I've been in the data space, and we always talk about, is it complete and accurate? Like, every step of the way. Did I get everything I was supposed to get?
Right.
Is it correct? Was it, if it was text, was it text? If it was supposed to be a number, was it a number? In a reasonable range, have you put 1 billion trillion in there? That's just not even a thing we know is ever going to happen.
For sure.
All of those points definitely resonate with me. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Okay, so let's wrap this up. What are your final thoughts you want to share? Something maybe we didn't talk about in this space, or why you're passionate about what you're doing, what you want to see the industry do next.
Sure. So I definitely one of my final thoughts. I mean, especially for people watching, which I think, our audience, we might grab in some non-banking folks, but especially at the banking level, and probably this is a preaching to the choir, but advocacy is so important, right? Like legislators, this may sound naive, but I do feel like they all do really want to do the right thing. They do want to make progress. They want to help people. At some point, that was their goal. Maybe they lose sight. I don't know. But mostly, I think they all want to help. But the thing is, they're not mortgage people. It's like kind of like they write the rules, and the rules sound awesome on paper. And then you go to apply them into a real world scenario, and you have these impacts you didn't intend, or you find that it just doesn't work at all in the real world. To avoid all of that heartburn, we have to get involved long before the bills hit the table or the rules make it in to be codified into law or whatever. And so I would encourage, if you're not actively involved with whatever kind of association you have, like maybe it's a bankers association or a credit union association. We have independent mortgage bankers, although I will say the Oklahoma Mortgage Bankers Associations, if you're a bank or a credit union and you're making mortgages, you can be in our group. And I think most states are like that. National organizations, get involved. Even if that's just signing yourself up to an email list and making an effort to read what's happening. And, everyone has some kind of a vehicle for letting your legislators know what you're for, what you're against, where things need to be worked. And participating in those really easy ways, that would be one final thought, like encouraging people. We can all make this better together, but it has to be together. And if we don't show up, somebody else will show up, and they will tell the narrative they want to tell, and it could be detrimental to us. And in the end, all of us, of course, we're businesses, we want to make money, but we don't want to make money at the expense of our communities and our consumers. I mean, I speak for First Trust and every mortgage lender I've ever met. We want to do what's right, and so but we have to show up. And so that's one thing I would say, definitely. If you're not involved in advocacy, listen, you don't have to be crazy about it like me and serve on a committee and go to Washington, D.C., but you'd be surprised at what just that little bit of, keeping yourself informed and responding when asked, what little bit of a difference that makes. And then the other thing I would love if somehow, and I've had a magic wand, we could find some way to get some stability back into our markets. I know that change is necessary oftentimes, and uncertainty and being uncomfortable, to grow and improve, those, you have to go through those phases. And I keep trying to tell myself that's maybe kind of what we're doing right now, right? Like we've eat our cake, we have our stomach ache, we have to take our medicine, and that's fine. But I would really love, as farther into this year, to find some markets, stability. Again, it's an uncontrollable for me, but I feel like if we can get there, it's going to get some more people off the sidelines. And I will say, 2 weeks ago, when I was in Washington, D.C., I heard the newly appointed head secretary, Scott Turner. He came and spoke to our group, and he said a lot of great things. One of the things he said, I'm just going to sum it up, I'm not going to quote him, was, that homes are the building blocks of families, and families are the building blocks for communities. And the more people you can get off the sidelines and you can get there and you can get to community, like that's where the real magic is. That's where the real, American dream is. It's not about the four walls, really. It's about what's built inside of the house. And so I think if we could introduce some market stability to get people off the sidelines, find some affordability options, whether that's with supply, deregulating some of the supply constraints, right, around building and zoning and stuff, or tax policy. Hey, listen, I'm willing, let's throw all of the fixes at it and see what happens. I think that should be important to all of us because of the impact that it makes.
To get into their home and into their community. That's a fantastic story. Thank you, Erika, for sharing your story about how you help communities, how you help people get into their homes and get off the sidelines, and how you lead with compassion and care. For everyone tuning in, thanks for joining us this week, and let's stay local. Have a great one.